Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Connectedness Breakout session. My name is Cecilia Reynolds. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Regional Youth Suicide Prevention Coordinator for Larimer County. So in other words, I work with youth serving agencies across the county to collaborate on suicide prevention efforts, in addition to managing our youth suicide prevention education programs here at the Alliance for Suicide Prevention. I will be your moderator for this portion of the event. So at this time, you all should be in a listen-only mode. Please make sure your mic is muted and keep it muted for the duration of the session. I'm going to ask that you all keep submitting questions or comments in the chat, just like we're doing right now. We do encourage engagement and participation through the chat feature throughout this session. Please note that this session is going to be recorded, and I'll be standing by if anyone needs any assistance. We also do have emotional support available. If you need anything, please look for the person named support and send them a private message over chat. Thank you all for joining us here today, and I am now going to turn it over to Ytell and to Teagan Brown. All right,
Great.
thanks, Jay. So feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
I think we're going to introduce ourselves. Teagan, would you like to go first?
Yes, hello. My name is Teagan. I am the intern at Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and I am I'm a part-time. I'm also a magician, and I'm living here in Germany. Long story short, I came here for spring break and got stuck and decided to apply for a visa. So, but I'm from Larimer County, and I see some familiar faces. So I'm excited to present to you on Connectedness.
And my name is Ytell. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, and I am the LGBTQ plus youth outreach coordinator at the Alliance for Suicide Prevention. And we're both really excited to be here and share a bit about connectedness and the Connectedness Pillar with you. So we're going to start out, we're both going to tell a couple stories about how connectedness has affected our lives, and Teagan's going to start with that. So Teagan, would you like to tell your story?
Yes. Hi, my name is Teagan, he, him, his, and I was a, bred and born kind of entertainer type. I did as little as I could to kind of stand out in high school. I don't know if you want to show that image, Jay, but here I am at the Fort Collins Tour de Fat there on my unicycle. And for me, I think that if you want to like skip back, you don't have to show that photo. You can skip back to me if you want to skip back to speaker view. For me, I really loved to entertain people because I love to make people feel more connected. And I knew that it would bring people together. And I knew that connection with most people was awkward. Meeting new people, making connections between people was an awkward endeavor most of the time. But luckily, I learned a lot of magic. And that's how I was able to bridge the gap. And I think as a lot of high schoolers who were dealing with social anxiety and who were dealing with, feeling a little bit isolated, and especially for me as a closeted queer kid in the theater department in my local high school, it was difficult for me to, be relatable to people and to be able to reach out to people in a way that felt sustainable for me. So I was lucky enough that the one time that I felt really connected to my peers in high school was when Rachel's Challenge came through. And I don't know if you'd be able to give me a show of hands. How many of you guys know about Rachel's Challenge, just from people that I can see? Do you guys know Rachel's Challenge? Anybody here? No? A couple people? Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Rachel's Challenge is a nonprofit that comes into different high schools across the US. And this is not a plug for Rachel's Challenge. I don't work for them. But basically, they come in and they do emotional learning, and they do a seminar where they bring all these kids together. And luckily, it was a Friday, and I heard that Rachel's Challenge was coming, and my close friend Ryan was going to go. And the only reason why I went is because I had a French test that I wanted to ditch. So luckily, I ended up going to Rachel's Challenge, and they brought us all into a big room together. And before this, I had a hard time making friends and a hard time feeling connected to those around me. I had been, kind of pegged as like the queer kid, as the other, so to speak. And then I went to Rachel's Challenge, and they brought us all together, and they drew a line in the room. If you guys are familiar with this, what happens is they bring everybody together and they say, if you, and this is everybody, these are all the jocks, these are the kids that have bullied me, these are all of the other kids in the high school, not just the theater kids that I always hang out with. And they say, if you've been emotionally abused at home, please cross the line, you know? And then I saw a bunch of people, my friends, cross the line. And then I got to see in their eyes that they had struggles at home, you know, that I wasn't really aware of. And then they said, okay, if you are having, you know, if you have been, you know, physically abused at home, you know, please cross the line. If you have had troubles with this, please cross the line. If you have had difficulty with this, if you have thought about suicide before, please cross the line. And I got to see all of my peers, you know, the school bullies, people that had picked on me, people that I didn't know, all cross the line. And I got to connect with them in a way that was, I think, a difficult thing to do in a high school setting. And it was a little bit forced. It was a little bit awkward, but it was a good example of what a nonprofit can do to come in, and an organization can do to come in and bridge connection in an environment that can be particularly damaging, traumatizing for kids. High school for a lot of queer kids is a difficult time. I know it was for me. And it was just an example of how I was able to find connection. And that day I found my best friend, Ryan, and we've been close friends ever since. But for me, it's a story that I like to think about because it's a way that I know that I can feel connected to people, even if it's in a large setting, even if it's, you know, it seems impossible to bring all these kids together to make them feel connected to one another. And I think it's a way that ASP is looking to bridge the gaps for other organizations in a way that we're looking to partner with other organizations on a broader scale through the Connectedness Pillar. And I feel so passionate about connectedness because it's a way that I felt connected before. So that's my story. And Jay is going to tell her story about why connectedness is so important.
Thank you for your story, Teagan. Yeah, so I also have a story about connectedness. I'm sure that many of us, if not all of us, have some sort of story about feeling connected or feeling disconnected. And so this is my story. When I was about halfway through 6th grade, my family moved here to Colorado. And I was really excited at first for a fresh start because I'd been getting bullied at school for being gay. And I hoped that I could kind of escape that. But little did I know how much worse things were about to get for me. My family bought my mom's childhood home from my grandma, which is an old farmhouse about 15 miles away from the nearest town. And I started school halfway through the semester in January, which is a hard time to start school, especially in middle school. And I was quickly met with that same bullying I'd experienced before we moved. In fact, it got a lot worse. The kids at school called me Gay Jay and other things that I'm not going to repeat here. And at lunch, the kids would chant, "Jay is gay, she should go away," until I was in tears and would go away. I got harassed day in and day out in the hallways, at lunch, and even on the long bus ride home. And then when I was at home, even though I had a really loving and caring family, I was often alone. I was alone in my room, and the only other people my age were my 2 sisters, and they were often in town spending time with their friends. I didn't have any friends, so I stayed at home alone. I didn't have anywhere to go. Remember, we lived miles away from anything except for fields and cows. My mental health really quickly deteriorated. I felt isolated and alone, and I contemplated suicide a lot during this time. I remained isolated and lonely for just about the next 8 years throughout middle school and high school. This was a really, really hard time in my life. And then I went off to college and everything changed. I joined the climbing club, the performance poetry troupe. I made a bunch of close friends. I was really enjoying studying English. It was something that I loved. And I had lots of friends. I was no longer miles away from civilization. My life kind of turned around at this point in time. I was engaged in pro-social activities. I was no longer depressed and suicidal. And I was overall feeling a lot better about everything. But there was still something kind of wrong. I was beginning to realize that I was queer. All those painful memories resurfaced. All that bullying that I'd faced and that trauma. I'd hid this part of myself because I was afraid that if I was gay, I'd be ostracized and made fun of for it, just like I had been throughout middle school and high school. I was scared and alone all over again. Even though I had a lot of friends, this was something that I felt like I couldn't share with them. And so I had to deal with it by myself. And then something even bigger happened. In class, I learned about what it meant to be transgender, and I thought, hey, that sounds a lot like me. And I realized that not only was I not straight, but I might be trans too. And suddenly what started out as just one little problem, something that I felt like could be kind of ignored and shoved back into the closet, had now become this huge, unavoidable thing. and it was terrifying. So I started reading about what it meant to be trans, and I started seeing a therapist, but I just felt all alone again. And I read all these stories. I'm going to share my screen for you to see. I read all these stories online of people who had lost all of their friends when they'd come out, people who were disowned by their families. I read about people who were discriminated against at work and at school, and I felt unsafe and I felt alone. I found myself returning to that dark place where I'd been throughout my teen years, and I was afraid that if I came out, bad things might happen. I was afraid that I would lose all the people I loved and cared about. My family might stop talking to me. My best friend might leave me. I didn't know what I would do if that happened, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I was really scared. And then when I finally worked up the courage to come out to a small group of friends, I was really shocked with their response. I'd prepared myself to be laughed at, excluded, and ridiculed, but it was with their support and love that I found the bravery to begin coming out to everyone else in my life. So here are just a few screenshots. This is actually like from my chats where I messaged my friends and said, hey, I think I'm transgender. I just want to let you all know. And for each person that I told, I kind of mentally prepared myself to lose their friendship or their love. You know, when I sat down, I was like, I have to text my best friend, my lifelong best friend who I've known since I was in preschool. What if he doesn't ever want to talk to me again? I had to accept that that was a possibility before I ever let him know. And then you can see there on the side the message that he sent back to me. And so all this support was really vital. And then here's some more screenshots of things that my family said when I came out. And of course, here's a picture of me and my dog, and he loves me just the same. And that support, it really saved my life. Feeling connected to people saved me. And that's why connectedness is so important. That's why it matters, and why it matters so much to me. That's why I'm so passionate about this. So now that you've heard our stories, we're going to dive into what the Connectedness Pillar is.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Jay. That was an awesome story. We're now going to go into defining what the Connectedness Pillar is and why it's so important. So the Connectedness Pillar aims to address several risk factors associated with suicide. Mental illness is obviously not the only factor. Loneliness and isolation are huge factors that contribute to suicide as well. An interesting fact that you guys might want to know about from WebMD is that the mortality rate of feeling a deep sense of isolation over the course of your day is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes, which is a lot of cigarettes. So these are for people who are in solitary confinement in prison, or people who are in an elderly retreat center who don't have anybody to visit them. So obviously it has a huge impact on your life expectancy, and it's a big way for us to prevent suicide is to make people more connected.
So you might hear us talk a little bit about some specific populations that are targeted by the pillar. And the reason that we talk about those populations a little bit more specifically is because they are higher risk for suicide than the general population, and they're higher risk because of factors related to connectedness specifically. So here's just a few statistics about these populations. For instance, LGBTQ plus people, according to the Trevor Project, a 2019 study found that 39% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months. Compare that to 17% of the general population who contemplate committing suicide in the past 12 months, according to the CDC. It's over double. Veterans as well have a very high rate of suicide, according to the US Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. After adjusting for differences in age, the rate of suicide in 2015 was 2.1 times higher among veterans compared with non-veteran adults. And finally, older adults. A 2012 study found that in most countries throughout the world that report such statistics to the World Health Organization, suicide rates tend to rise as a function of age for both men and women to a peak in old age.
So why are we focusing on connectedness specifically? Well, each of the groups that Jay mentioned have experienced a heightened risk of factors related to suicide. This will kind of tie into the main room session originally, where we were showing you the graph with the 6 figures, demonstrating that we're focusing on these demographics. And this is kind of why we're focusing on these demographics. For the LGBTQ flag, the icon that you might have seen earlier, a Trevor Project study in 2019 found that LGBTQ youth are 40% less likely to report having a suicide attempt in the past year if they have at least one supportive adult in their life. So just one supportive adult in their life can reduce a suicide attempt by 40% in just the past year. So accepting LGBTQ youth is suicide prevention. Accept us. So for veterans, this is another demographic we're focusing on. A 2018 study found that multiple aspects of social connectedness are associated with depression outcomes among military veterans. Loneliness itself may represent the most important components of connectedness, as is associated with depression severity, suicidality, and health-related behaviors. So treating loneliness in vets is suicide prevention. And lastly, for older adults, a study in 2012 found that limited social connectedness is associated with suicidal ideation and suicide in later life, as Jay mentioned earlier. So primary prevention programs designed to enhance social connections, as well as a sense of community, could potentially decrease suicide risk, especially among men in particular. So enhancing social connections and building community among older adults is suicide prevention.
So now it's time to jump into exactly what the Connectedness Pillar is. The Connectedness Pillar aims to reduce the risk factors that Teagan and I just spoke about, such as isolation, lack of social support, and loss of relationships, by implementing strategies to increase community connection. So what are those strategies? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about them later, but the strategies are broken down into 3 broad categories and include the implementation and support of policies and programs that promote behavioral health, promoting engaging community events, and promoting workplace policies that support inclusion. But this all starts with community partnership and collaboration.
So how are we going to do this collaboration? Well, we can't just make people more connected, obviously. So we're going to partner with Larimer County, and we're going to collaborate on cultivating a more connected community. So obviously, so this hasn't been done yet. Obviously, this is the plan for the future. So as an example for you guys to kind of grasp what this means, and please feel free to ask us questions at the end if you have any questions about this. Maybe seem a little bit vague, but just as an example for you guys for a more connected community, my co-presenter Jay could reach out to a school admin in Pruder School District and say, hey, I noticed that you guys do not have a gay-straight alliance. And for those who don't know what a gay-straight alliance is, it's a club that is in schools that allows for queers and allies to show up and support each other. And a gay-straight alliance is a great way for LGBTQ kids to feel connected to others. So Jay would pitch this to a school admin and say that the GSAs is also a step in the Colorado National Collaborative 5-year plan to reduce suicide. So Jay would propose that they work together to make these kids have a better sense of belonging by proposing a gay-straight alliance in the school.
So like Teagan said, the most important part of this pillar is collaboration connection. So beyond the specific demographics that we spoke about earlier, this is a breakdown of the community groups that we plan to partner with. You can see that the pillar has broken the groups down into 4 categories. The first of which is youth-serving organizations, including schools and higher education. This includes all of the Larimer County school districts, institutions of higher education, such as universities and colleges, and other groups that serve the youth of Larimer County, such as youth clubs and coalitions. The next group is service members, veterans, and families. This includes those who work in mental and medical health, organizations that work with veterans, and organizations that work with families. The next group is workplace settings. This is a really broad category, and it covers most places of business. Here on the screen, we've identified a few sectors that we feel might be most in need of connectedness strategies or most open to collaborating on connectedness. And finally, we plan to collaborate with other key community settings, such as local faith communities, organizations that serve older adults, and organizations that serve people with disabilities. Now, I'd like to ask you all to think, and if you have video, raise your hand if you're involved in any of these groups. Here's a hint: if you have a job, you're probably involved. If you have a kid who goes to school in Larimer County, you're involved. If you have a parent or grandparent who receives services or care, you're also involved. If you attend church or another religious service, then you're already involved. Hopefully this shows you just how broadly we aim to collaborate within the community to implement the specific connectedness strategies, which we're going to discuss next. So the strategies are, like the example Teagan gave of me reaching out to the school district to implement GSAs. These are the 3 strategies, but none of these are going to be completed in a vacuum. We're going to work together with people who work in the community to complete each of these tasks. Additionally, while each of these tasks only looks like one item on your screen, please be aware that there's lots of sub-steps within each of these that all address those populations that we talked about. So just these 3 things are not, it's more like 100 things. For each strategy, we'll give you an example of what implementing it might look like, but just remember that each example is just one of those steps that we're going to take. So the first strategy is promoting behavioral health, including opportunities for teaching problem solving and coping skills. This strategy involves providing education, mental health resources, and therapy, and giving support to pro-social programs. That's pretty broad, so let me give you an example. Our Veterans Outreach Coordinator, Marshall Spring, might contact some local veteran-serving organizations and work with those groups to provide therapy to vets and make it accessible and affordable. That's just one way in which we might implement this first strategy.
So the next strategy is going to be increasing opportunities for a safe space and inclusive community events. So what does this look like with inclusive community events? So an example would be Cecilia Reynolds. Hey, the program manager at the Alliance. So she might work to support and grow the Alliance's Youth Advisory Council, which is basically just a group of kids that come together and brainstorm and put into plan and action, youth-led meetings and events. And this is a way for her to bring together kids into the community, and by making them feel more connected to their community, by brainstorming and creating these organization connections. Now, this is obviously a little bit trite with the COVID, so we're going to be doing our best to promote this in a healthy and safe way, while also doing our best to outreach to people during an isolating time.
And then the last connectedness strategy is building public support for the creation and implementation of policies for the inclusion of the LGBTQ+ community. Hopefully my story helped you realize why this might be important. When we talk about building inclusion for the LGBTQ+ community, this includes both policy changes and inclusivity trainings. One of the specific directives in the Connectedness Pillar is that within 18 months, at least one identified sector partner will have written workplace protections for LGBTQ+ staff. So that might look like myself or another member of the Alliance reaching out to some local workplaces and asking if they're interested in writing LGBTQ+ protections in their workplace code. And then if we find a local workplace that is interested in that, I would provide the support and resources that they need in order to achieve that, which includes providing inclusivity training to staff and assisting in the drafting of LGBTQ+ protections. This specific measure will help LGBTQ+ people feel safer and thus more connected at work. So by implementing these strategies, we hope to build a more connected community and reduce those risk factors that we spoke about earlier to prevent suicide.
So that's it. We did it. That's the Connectedness Pillar. And hopefully you guys can understand how we're doing this, why we're doing it, who we're including, what we're going to be doing to implement it. And we hopefully broke this down so that you guys can understand it as a concrete plan and less as like just a word. So if you guys have questions, please type them in the chat. Cecilia will bing us. And if not, then if you don't have any questions, then feel free to bounce back to the next session. But for now, I'll give you guys time to have some questions. So thank you so much for listening.
Teagan, that was such great timing. That was perfect. Beautiful. I have a question that just came in from Bethy Shaw. She says, can GSAs be implemented in community nonprofits? If so, how do I do that? I love that question. What do you guys think?
I don't see any reason why not. Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe, hey, Bethy, I would love to connect you with Jay and we can chat about that. I think that is such a great idea and a really great way to expand GSAs. Let's see, we have another question coming in How do you think we can connect to victims of crime? That's a really interesting question.
It's a great one. I think victims advocates might be the best point of contact for that. But that's a difficult population to sometimes identify.
That is definitely, and I imagine that kind of spans populations. I'd be interested in hearing more about what you're thinking about that, Brian, and how we can connect with you over that question. Let's see, this is a really good one. Okay, I've been working on creating, this is from, let's see, Janaki Jane. I hope I didn't pronounce that wrong. I've been working on creating safe spaces, and Janaki, thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. Janaki asks, I've been working on creating safe spaces and community events in my community, but find it can be hard to get those most impacted to join. Do you have ideas about how to do more effective outreach to lonely or isolated folks? This is an awesome question. Did we freeze up a little bit? Did you all hear that one?
My internet's being a little bit slow.
Okay, Teagan, do you have any thoughts?
It's people, and I think that is a big struggle for right now. I think particularly now people are feeling isolated, and virtual groups is like a safe way for people to show up in a very low risk setting. So now could actually be a really good time to outreach to people who are feeling lonely and isolated. Besides that, we may have to brainstorm after this.
I agree, and I've also run into the issue of the fact that the people who are the most impacted are often the most hesitant to join. And I agree with Teagan, virtual spaces can be really useful. They can also feel very unsafe if the only place that someone has to access a virtual space is not a safe space. For example, a closeted teen living with their parents might have a hard time getting online into an online LGBTQ plus space without their parents noticing. So even with the virtual world that we have going on right now, it can be really difficult. And I think the most important thing is making those spaces accessible and also making those spaces open to everyone so that people aren't called out by joining them. You know, if you have a group that focuses on LGBTQ plus people, having that open to everyone, including allies, so that then someone can join in under the guise of being an ally rather than outing themselves. And that's true for other minority groups as well.
I want to touch on just these last two questions, and I'll give two quick shout outs for any of these questions that go unanswered, or to dive more into them. I would invite all of you to join our LGBT plus work group, which you can do after the symposium. We'll be linking you all to a Get Involved document. I also want to give a shout out to Kimberly from Splash and NoCo Safe Space. She is such a fantastic resource for this community and has been doing this work for a long time. So I highly encourage partnership with her. I do want to just touch on, let's see, Susan from UC Health says, can you explain how introducing with pronouns promotes inclusion? And she expands on that a little bit.
I think that's a really good question. The Cheryl Lang question.
I just wanted to touch on that. How can introducing with pronouns promote inclusion? And then Cheryl did also ask about reaching out to older adults, which is also so important. So thoughts on those last?
I can speak on pronouns. So the reason that introducing yourself with pronouns promotes inclusion, it really only works if everybody does it. Because some people may not use the pronouns that you expect. For instance, I use they, them pronouns as well as she, her. Most people probably wouldn't guess that. You don't look at me and go, oh, they look like they use gender neutral pronouns. For instance, someone who is transgender and has not taken any steps to transition, whether that's by choice or because they can't, they might not look like the gender that they actually are. And so by assuming pronouns, you can assume incorrectly. And you don't actually ever know a person's pronouns unless you ask or unless they tell you. But by singling someone out and saying, what are your pronouns? And they're the only person in the room who might be gender nonconforming or not appear to be the gender that they were assigned at birth. then they've been singled out. They've been called out, and the attention has been drawn to their gender. And so by introducing yourself with pronouns and saying, hello, my name is this, and my pronouns are she, her, they, them, then you've opened a space for other people to do that without being called out. And then other people can feel safer sharing their own pronouns. So let me know if I explained that well. I can speak more to that if you would like.
That was great, Jay. And then just for kind of the last bit, Teagan, it sounded like maybe you had some thoughts on Cheryl's
Yeah.
question about
Wait,
older adults.
how are we doing on time? Are we almost done?
We are almost done, but I'll let you answer that one and then I'll wrap us up.
Okay. I'm sorry, I misread the name. It was Ready the Master's question. So it's easy to create an event for those who are out of the closet, but to get those questioning or in the closet is one of the biggest goals regarding how to include them. So for me personally, I wasn't out as bisexual until I was like 20 years old. And my school did have a GSA. I don't know if anybody went. I never went. I knew it was there. But the biggest thing for me was that I had a school that had some sort of system set up that allowed other kids to come out. And for me to know that it was okay to be gay and to not get, bullied out of my school was a great way to destigmatize being queer and being out. So for me, I didn't want to go to the GSA. I was kind of questioning. I was in the closet, but I wasn't ready, So I think the biggest part is to just have an accepting and safe space for that. And then people will come out when it's safe.
Thank you, Teagan. All right, I'm going to kind of close this out here with a couple of final words. So thank you so much, Jay Ytell and Teagan Brown, for speaking with us today and for sharing your expertise. That was so fabulous. That was actually the first time I've seen that presentation as well, and I was really so moved by it. So we look forward to continuing the conversation around connectedness. If you're interested in receiving any trainings or joining a work group, especially the LGBTQ plus work group, please look at our next steps document, which we're going to send out towards the end. Please fill out the post survey at the end, which we'll send out at the end of this event. That is a great way for us to collect your information so we can follow up with you. The post survey also assists us with grant funding, so much appreciated if everyone can take that at the end of the day when we send it out to you. Thank you for attending this session. Please refer back to the ASP website for information on the sessions following. I'm going to put the link back into the main room if you want to go back for an optional guided break, and the next breakout session is going to start at 11:15. You also have the option to just stay in this room. This room is going to lead into economic stability, but if you want to join a different pillar, simply go back to the ASP event website and you can choose any one of those. So I'm putting the link to the main room right here in the chat, and I hope to see you all and connect with you all soon. And thank you again to Jay and to Teagan.
Thank you all for viewing our presentation and for asking fantastic questions.